Back up the Brinks truck. Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele got paid by the Winnipeg Jets, and they are, it turns out, sticking around. We'll discuss that as well as some big questions for Chicago and the Anaheim Ducks on today's Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. We are your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, indeed. Welcome into a Western Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube with the season starting this week so you don't miss out on any big news before the start of the season. And with games going on, there will be a ton of news going on here over the next few months, so make sure you don't miss out. On today's episode, we discuss Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele's new deals with Winnipeg, what it means for them this year, what it means for them going forward. We'll also discuss the Chicago Blackhawks and the Anaheim Ducks with their big questions ahead of opening night. Plenty more to discuss on today's episode as well. My name is Seth Toupal, your host of Locked On Wild, and joined today by Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators, my Tuesday co-host. And Nick, I am floored to start because we have talked at length all offseason. I think a lot of people associated with the Winnipeg Jets from the media standpoint all season about how it just seems like this chapter's coming to an end, and that you're either going to see two franchise icons get traded at the deadline or they're going to leave in the offseason. Yeah, no, they're sticking around because now it's Connor Hellebuyck as he signs a massive deal. Mark Scheifele signs one to match. Is shocked an inappropriate word to discuss your reaction to seeing both of these deals get done?
Well, first off, how long were you waiting to use that Connor Hellebuyck line?
All day. Literally all day.
I feel like you just had that one in your back pocket ready to go. I don't know if I would say I'm shocked. I would say like kind of middle of the road surprised. Because at the end of the day, these are two franchise icons. These are players, the Jets wanted to keep. And I would assume the only way they would leave town is if they went to Jets management and said, we don't want to be here anymore. I know Hellebuyck did that reportedly earlier in the offseason, but came back a few weeks later and rescinded that trade request. So, I mean, this screams to me as the Winnipeg Jets still not really sure what the future holds for them, but they know they have kind of two backbones to build around, or at the very least, two guys that can kind of help shepherd in that new generation of Jets talent. You think of kind of what Anze Kopitar did to the LA Kings, stuck around. And it's kind of been that main consistent piece throughout both eras, both, their Stanley Cup winning era and sort of this new era of the LA Kings. You think of the Predators re-signing Roman Josi and Philip Forsberg in recent years, building blocks as they sort of trade away some of their other key players and bring some younger players in. So this seems like that kind of move where Winnipeg is like, look, we have no idea what the future is going to hold. We may rebuild this thing in a couple of years. All we know is we need some stability, and it's going to start with, arguably one of the best goalies in the West in the back end, and, a guy in Mark Scheifele who has always been a quietly consistent player.
Yeah, and it's one thing to be facing this dilemma with guys that are kind of on the fringe, where maybe it's not like a top 5 goalie in the league, but somebody who's like between 15 and 20. And you're like, boy, do we re-sign him or do we hope that we can find something else to to fill that spot. No, this is Connor Hellebuyck is one of the premier goalies in the NHL. And as you alluded to, Mark Scheifele is a very underrated, which is crazy to say because he's in his 30s, very underrated center in his own right. And this is Winnipeg kind of looking ahead a little bit. Maybe they had a tarot card reading or something along those lines and just went with kind of the grass isn't always greener approach. They could opt for the full teardown, but do you really want to stomach what we've seen from the likes of Anaheim, San Jose, some of those other teams that have been at this for a long time? And now you can just kind of cultivate the rest of the roster, sprinkle in some moves here and there around those two. But it's very clear that Winnipeg wanted to keep these guys around to be part of whatever the heck this looks like this year and beyond.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the Winnipeg Jets sort of feel like they're that team who we don't really know what they're going to be this season because, you know, they don't scream like they have a lot of talent or at least a lot of depth up front. But it's one of those things where because Connor Hellebuyck's in net, you can never quite count them out. So, you know, you and I talked when we were doing the Winnipeg Jets preview, you know, it's kind of seemed like this year may kind of shift the scales into what the Jets do long-term. A little surprised if you're Connor Hellebuyck, if anything, that maybe you don't wait to, or, you know, maybe, you know, you just kind of wait and see at least halfway through the season to kind of see where this team is, because if not, got a chance to get paid, you know, in free agency next year. But, you know, from Hellebuyck and Scheifele's standpoint, a 7-year contract is hard to turn down, especially when, you know, both guys are going to be, you know, 37, 38 when these deals expire. So, you know, and if they're comfortable in Winnipeg, then this is kind of, you know, two good players to keep around.
Yeah, and it'll be that'll be their last big payday. Now, it's not to say that they'll be done playing at that point, but this is the last opportunity to cash in. And so it feels like a situation where team and player were able to kind of get to where they both wanted for this to happen. But I think the big team that is going to look at this and be frustrated is, again, the LA Kings. We talked about them as somebody who may need to take a peek at the goalie situation as the season unfolds. And now this is one huge piece of that puzzle that is off the table unless you're able to take on, and Winnipeg's not going to trade these guys right after signing them. So they're off the table. And so for the Los Angeles Kings now, you kind of have to look and say, all right, if our goalie situation doesn't work out the way that we were hoping to, where do we go?
Yeah, I mean, there's other goalies out there, but I feel like that was kind of the big one they were swinging at. I mean, who knows? Maybe they turn much, much further south and look at Nashville to see where UC Saros lands at the moment. But that's a different topic for another day.
That's a spicy potential tease for later on this season. But
let's hope not, from my perspective.
Good for Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele. Hellebuyck. Sorry, I did it again. Good for those guys getting what they were looking for, getting what they deserve. They're both great players. And now it is going to be fascinating to see how Winnipeg responds and how they play this season with those deals looming on the horizon. So from there, we go to two teams that we referenced earlier is still in the process of trying to figure out what they look like and where they go. And so we'll talk about a team in particular in the Chicago Blackhawks who is hoping that they found their next new star. We'll talk about the Chicago Blackhawks after this on today's episode of Locked On NHL. Folks, it's playoff baseball time, and the NHL season is right around the corner. And if you are like me, you probably decide the day of, maybe even a couple of hours before the game starts, that you want to go see your NHL team do battle with their biggest rival or see your favorite baseball team advance through the postseason. Tickets used to be a nightmare trying to pick up tickets on the same day of the event. You don't know how much they're going to cost. And worse, you get the tickets and then you show up at the spot and you have a pillar right in front of you. It's awful. Well, GameTime is here to change the equation. GameTime helps you find last minute ticket deals with their flash and zone deals throughout the course of the week. It is so easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast, the Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL. Seth Toupal joined by Nick Morgan. All right, Nick, let's go Chicago first. Final two teams. We've gotten all the way down to the bottom of the standings. And honestly, this one's pretty easy for me because a lot of the success for Chicago this year and beyond stems on Connor Bedard. Is he the one? And from what we've seen this preseason, it's a resounding yes. He's looked great. He has looked like the NHL experience is not too fast for him or too much. And so it looks like Chicago is going to be set with another franchise level player. And so I think one of the biggest questions then after Bedard is, how does the rest of the team do this season?
Yeah, and they really put an emphasis on trying to get the right people around Bedard in terms of, veteran leadership. Taylor Hall on the first line. It also looks like Tyler Johnson from Tampa Bay on that first line as well. So, two veteran experienced guys, one former Cup winner, one former Hart Trophy winner. You mentioned, Nick Foligno and Corey Perry coming in to sort of the bottom six of that lineup, providing some stability there and some good locker room leadership. So it just kind of feels like, the Chicago Blackhawks goal this season is, let's just kind of ease Bedard in. Let's put some people here where Bedard's not going to be like the guy. He's not going to have to be, the main guy who's answering questions after every post-game interview, or things go wrong for the Chicago Blackhawks. There's 50 cameras in his face after every game. You got some veterans on that team that are going to will in to step in and kind of handle that part of it. And I know a lot of people are going to say, Connor Bedard's done all these interviews leading up to the draft. There's been media following him since he was 15, 16 years old. Shouldn't be a big difference. It's different from, when you're, sort of the next big thing. And there's all these, I don't want to say fluff pieces, but all these, stories calling you once in generational talent, stuff like that. That's different than the media putting your game under the microscope, if you're struggling or if the team is losing. And so those are kind of the little things that Connor Bedard, I think, still has to get acclimated to in the NHL. And he's going to have some good leadership in the locker room that can kind of show him how to do it by example. And that to me is going to be the big thing for the Chicago Blackhawks this year, is just getting Bedard kind of used to life in the NHL, because the talent part is there. He has shown already in preseason he can play. The skills are going to be there. I think it's just going to be, sort of the day-to-day routine, 82 game schedule. That's the kind of thing that I think Bedard's really going to have to learn this season. And I think that, the Blackhawks brought the right people in to help them do that.
Yeah, they brought the wrecking crew, Nick Foligno and Corey Perry too, because I'm sure there are going to be a couple of instances in which players on other teams try to do the welcome to the league type friendly hug in quotes.
Yeah.
And so they've done well, as you said, to make sure that he's got some skill around him, but also some beef in the lineup as well. So it's just going to be really interesting to see how this team plays, because you and I have talked about it before. It seems like Chicago believes that they've got the right coach and the right GM in place. And so now it's all about just stacking those building blocks together and just really putting one foot forward in front of the other to avoid situations where, you have a major step back, or you maybe delay your process by a year or two because some prospects don't pan out. And so there's really no pressure on Chicago this year from a wins perspective, but there is a lot of pressure just to make sure that that they start and continue to move things in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think the key is also just going to be, what is Bedard's expectations for this year? A lot of people are like, is he going to hit 90 points? Is he going to hit 100 points? That's a big matzo ball for, a rookie in the NHL. I mean, remember, Crosby didn't have that many his first year, and Austin Matthews struggled a little bit his first year. So I think we need to keep in mind that this is still an 18, 19-year-old kid who's going to try to figure out his game. I think there's no doubt he can be that once in a generation player that all of us have thought about. I think it's just safe for us to kind of keep our expectations in check. And I think that will take a lot of pressure off of him. The other big thing for me, for in terms of the Blackhawks, maybe that's going to keep them from making a run this morning is just in goal. They have absolutely no goaltending situation. No disrespect to Peter Mrazek, but I mean, there's just, unless he goes on, sort of an out of nowhere Aiden Hill run, there's going to be some games in which, the Blackhawks are going to lose 5-4 or, find themselves in weird 6-5 games. So, I don't exactly see the Blackhawks making that big old surprise run or anything like that this year.
Just to kind of circle back quickly, when you think of like a Calder Trophy winner, just a rookie with a solid season, we're talking about typically somewhere between 15 and 20 goals and around like 50 points, right? Like somewhere for somebody that plays the entire season and really takes flight, like that's the kind of stat line you think of, I think. And so if Bedard can do something similar to that, got to feel like a win in his rookie year. And as you mentioned, still 18.
Yeah. But that's the other thing you kind of have to keep in mind too. A lot of these people winning Calder trophies, like, Matty Beniers had 57 points last year, but he's 20 years old when that happened. Like, he's had some development post his draft year. So that's the other thing, is these people are coming in, with a little bit more, I guess, sort of experience, if that's the right word. I mean, even Karl Kaprizov won the Calder Trophy with just 51 points. Next year he had 108, but that kind of gives you, a thinking. It's like, look, it's their first year in the NHL. If he winds up doing 90 to 100 points, that's one of the best rookie seasons ever in the history of the league. Not even Crosby was able to do that. So I just think, like, in terms of expectations, even 50 to 60 points would be a great first step for Connor Bedard. And I really hope that Blackhawk fans kind of keep that in mind when they maybe judge how this season went for him.
Yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day. Give it time. There will be hiccups as the season goes on, and it's important to just remember that you're talking about an extremely young player that is going to be, getting up to leading this team at some point over the next few years. So just let things play out, let it unfold, and good things will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, that's at least the case for Chicago. Now, for our final team, it's a young nucleus for the Anaheim Ducks. Are they still kind of finding their way through, or is this the season in which we finally see the Ducklings take flight? We will discuss that as we finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, you can snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And that's because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Again, just $5 and you get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props. How many passing yards is Kirk Cousins going to get this next game? Or rushing yards is Derrick Henry going to get? Over-unders and much, much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
One final segment here on today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan talking now about the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks, fewest points in the Western Conference this past season. Defense was an adventure, to say the least. I think they gave up, I don't know the exact stat, but I want to say they gave up the most shots in NHL history, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So it wasn't great, but it's a young nucleus. Trevor Zegras locked up for 3 years. You've got Troy Terry. You've got Mason McTavish. They've got some good young players. And so I guess my big question for the Ducks this season is they've got a new coach. And so is this the year that they finally start to take flight, or are we just in for another season similar to what we saw last year?
I mean, I don't think they're going to be as bad as last year, or at least not the same level of atrociousness, where they're getting outshot 45-20 every single game. I do kind of see the Ducks taking at least a small step forward this year. I'm not saying they're going to compete for a playoff spot or anything. I just think they may be happy with sucking a little bit less than they did last year. And it's going to be interesting for the Ducks this year because they have so many young people coming into the lineup. Leo Carlson appears to be on the Ducks opening night roster, as does Pavel Mintyukov, as does Tristan Leno, a couple of big, up-and-coming prospects. You're also going to have another year of Jamie Drysdale coming up. Mason McTavish is going to get another year better. And as you mentioned, Zegras and Troy Terry kind of leading that charge up front. So, if you're the Ducks, and if you're a Ducks fan, even if you're, finish in the bottom 5-6 in the league again, if you can look at those players that I mentioned, those young players, and say, okay, we saw them take another significant step forward this year, or showed signs of just being, well above on the right track in their development, I think you would be happy with this season.
Another question that I have, because he did not deserve what was thrown out in front of him, is what do we see from John Gibson this year? Because he faced just a ton of shots, a ton of pressure, relentless, one might say. And so with the fact that this is, again, going to be a very young team, what do we see from Gibson as this season unfolds? Does he kind of rise above some of that, or is he held down by just the lack of defense and the lack of puck handling going on the ice in front of him?
Yeah. It's funny. Every time the camera zoomed into John Gibson last year, I pictured Simon and Garfunkel, "Hello, darkness, my old friend," just playing like in his inner monologue. I mean, it's interesting because his stats have slowly gone downhill every year since 2020, which is when the Ducks kind of started this rebuilding direction. But is that because John Gibson is washed? Or is that because John Gibson went from, having to face, 26, 27 shots a game to 45, 46 per game? That's going to be the interesting question. If I'm the Anaheim Ducks, I kind of want to see, better, at least team defense in front of Gibson to really give an idea of, okay, what do we still have in him? Because it may be a case, Seth, of, hey, the Ducks, reduce the shot load by 10 shots per game. And all of a sudden, John Gibson is like a 9-10 save percentage guy yet again. That would do wonders, I think, for the Anaheim Ducks. But it's interesting because, Gibson going downhill, at least his stats going downhill. Is that because the team in front of him just absolutely sucks? Or is, this a little bit of regression? I don't think we have enough to know that just yet.
Yeah, you could make a compelling case if you're trying this in court, like you are the state of California against John Gibson, or I guess a better example would be like an arbitration hearing where you're presenting the numbers. It's hard to tell because they just not really any team defense last year at all, and your forward groups just are not built to possess the puck for lengthy amounts of time. That's not all his fault. And so it's going to be real interesting to see. And the other part of this, I think that's interesting too, is, they have a young goalie prospect in Dostal, I think his name is, who you would figure will start to get some time. Do they at some point say, hey, we want to go with this guy going forward? And then you have to enter do we trade him? Do we keep him as a backup? Muddy waters could potentially be on the horizon for John Gibson and the Anaheim Ducks. I remember tweeting out a couple of times during the course of last season, someone please save this man. He deserves better than just to be thrown to the wolves every night. And so that's kind of another storyline to watch as the season unfolds too.
Well, also to kind of throw a, damper into that entire thing too, remember there was kind of whispers that John Gibson wanted to trade earlier this offseason. He reportedly denied it, but, there has been some trade talk around John Gibson. So we'll see if that becomes a thing later this year.
Storylines abound for the Anaheim Ducks and for every team throughout the Western Conference. We hope you've enjoyed the big questions as we gear up for the NHL season, which begins for all teams this week. Some teams tonight, but everybody has action throughout the course of the week. So make sure that you stay tuned to Locked On NHL as the season unfolds. We will keep you covered each and every day of the week with our wonderful array of Locked On hosts that join throughout the course of the week. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already. We've got new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.